Welcome to the new episode of the Story Artist Show, and today I want to talk to you about how to write a first chapter, but not just a first chapter, but the first chapter of a book in a series, and not the first book, but let's say the second book. Why do I want to talk about this? Because I just recently wrote the second book in my series, and I was kind of really confused about what to do in the first chapter, because you have like these rules that work for the first chapter, like go straight into the action, bring in the characteristic moment, and so on. But how do we deal with readers' expectations in the second book of a series? Because you kind of have to recap what happened, bring in back new characters, and so on. But at the same time, don't bring in too much exposition, go straight into the story. And I found these things to be helpful, and that's what I did in my first chapter. And I want to talk about this right now, and after that I'm going to do a reading of the first chapter to tease you. So if you want to hear that, just stay tuned and listen to me reading the first chapter, and maybe if you want, you can go ahead and buy the book. It's still discounted for this week for 99 cents. And if you don't, feel free to just turn off the video, the podcast, after I finish talking about how to write the first chapter in a follow-up book. So what I did first, I decided to go into a POV character that wasn't there in the first book. So in the first book, I wrote from two POVs, the POV of my main character and the POV of the love interest. And in the second book, I brought in the POV of one of the friends as well, because he would play a major role in this book. And what I did, I started writing from the POV of this character. First off, to introduce this new POV, but also to show the reader that this character is going to be really important for the story. He has become one of the main characters in the second book. The second thing I did, and what I found really important, is to bring back the atmosphere of the book. So my book has a certain atmosphere, especially when it comes to the outer areas, the mountains, Scotland, the landscape. And this is what I did. I brought back this atmosphere. I described the mountains. I showed where they are in this village, in this outer area in Glencoe. And it was really important to me to convey this atmosphere and make the reader feel this again and feel at home again with that. And talking about feeling at home, I also brought back characters that the reader likes. So some of the main characters he knows from the other books, I brought them back to the reader, but I also showed how they have developed, what had happened to them before, and all the new things that had been happening to them prior to this first chapter. What I also found very important is to bring in humor from the beginning on with this POV character, because this POV character is, he has this character that he's very humorous and ironic, and I wanted to bring this in straight away. And this makes him likable as well. So this is kind of, for me, the characteristic moment that we have his certain voice that is ironic and that is full of humor. I tried to recap the ending of book one with several short sentences, mentioning that they are defeated and what had happened, and just remind the reader of what had happened in book one, because it's nearly a year when I had released book one already. But I found it really important not to sink into this exposition, because it's really, you're kind of tempted to start explaining everything again. So this has happened and this, and bring back the reader to status quo and remind him what had happened. But I found that it's really better to bring in here and there short sentences to remind the reader of what had been there before, but not too much of that. I also introduced a new situation to show the reader what is going on right now, so that they had been trying to rebuild Area 3, that there's still the rebels who are trying to fight with what they have, so they don't have an army, they don't have anything, because they've lost everything by the end of book one. But what they're trying to do is still rebel against the government by hiding this outer area and harboring the refugees from the labor camps and trying to help them start a new life, hidden from the eye of the government. And it was really important for me to show the conflict straight away. So to show that what they're fighting with is still their powerlessness. So they kind of trying to accept the defeat, but they can't. They still want to rebel. They still want to do something. And I'm showing this inner and outer conflict in the first chapter to show the atmosphere of this, of them trying to cope with what had happened, at the same time refusing to be outpowered by the government. And what I think is really important after all of that is end this chapter with a bang. So end it with a really interesting cliffhanger so that the reader says, oh wow, okay, I have to read on. So you kind of start a little bit, I feel like you need to start a little bit slower with the first chapter in the second book, for example, because you still have to do some recapping, explain some stuff, maybe bring in some new things. But you, at least by the end of the chapter, you need to finish with a bang, and you need to, to pull the reader in order for him to start reading the second chapter. So let's do some recapping of the most important points. Number 1, lure the reader in with the atmosphere that they know from your first book and some questions you put in straight away so that they need those questions answered. Number 2, bring in some characterization through humor so that they find these characters likable, and also through conflict straight away. It may be as minor as it is. Number 3, do some slight introduction and exposition of what had happened, but with only short minor sentences and no lengthy exposition. Number 4, bring back the loved characters that the readers know from the book 1 so that they instantly feel at home and instantly feel invested into those characters. And number 5, end the chapter with a bang. So when the reader reads that, he is instantly dragged into the story and it's impossible for him to put the book down. And now I'm going to read for you my first chapter in Prometheus Falling. Let's do this. Part 1, Chapter 1. Retirement doesn't suit me, Björn thought while walking through the valley of Glencoe. Several months had gone by since he had lost his friend. Only then did he realize how much Adama meant to him. He missed debating the destruction of the global order, following him into battle, forging crazy plans. Despair of defeat had pierced him deeply. The army scattered, the rebellion over. Maybe it was what Adama had stood for that Björn missed the most, a new hope he could cling to in his heart. This hope had died with him. Glencoe village had populated quickly after the destruction. Word of mouth spread throughout the outer areas that this was a safe haven for all those who had escaped the labor camps and now were on the run from the peace army. Björn had used his genial skills for evil and had hacked the government's satellite, projecting an old image from the destroyed village and thus hiding them from the drones with his infamous device. As long as no global army trucks drove out here, they were invisible, non-existent. He glanced into the face of the woman responsible for his sleepless nights over the last 3 months. Annie crouched in front of a turf hut, black houses, the Highlanders called them here. Dark blonde strands of wavy hair fell into a face with delicate features, pointing to a smile that invited the heart to rest. She was treating the wound of a 6-year-old boy. It was nothing major, just a graze wound, and the chubby kid was crying more from fright than pain. He was a boy who had survived the horrors of the labor camps and now faced the uneven hills of the highlands. Kids forgot much easier. There was something about their alertness to the moment that Björn himself unlearned with the years. But now he increasingly found himself lost in Annie's generous face. It had to be the boredom, the loss of purpose that had made him think all these stupid thoughts. After all, he had renounced love since Kari, but Annie was so different from the frantic, genius girl he had given his heart to once. Vivendell. Björn had called her by the Nordic name of a flower common in Norway, creamy white in color, tubular and two-lipped. It perfectly described her. Björn smiled involuntarily when Annie kissed the kid's forehead and sent him off to play with the others. Annie glanced up to catch Björn's persistent stare, and he let his eyes slide towards the mountains, pretending not to notice her, which was stupid, of course. She caught his glance before he could evade hers. Still, he could not help himself. He felt boyish in her presence, at a loss for words. From the corner of his eye, he saw how she got up and began to walk towards him. Damn. Annie had found an interest in medicine during the past month and had become the healer of Area 3. It was because of Adama, he was sure of it, because she was trying to preserve a trace of his ghost. Morning, Annie's voice echoed between the huts, and Björn watched the wind play with her curls and her skirt, which had become dirty from kneeling in the moist earth. The only thing he managed to do was smile, hoping he did not look too foolish. Something was just happening in his gut. Just say something, anything. Björn cleared his throat. Beautiful skirt, you fool. Annie looked down at the dirty rag he had just complimented her on and smiled innocently. It seemed like she was absolutely unaware of the rising tension in his belly. He felt like a stupid teenage boy. Steps came from the right, and Björn noticed Caleb's figure approaching from the mountains. Thank the gods. His face was at ease when he returned from his regular morning walks, but it could barely hide the deep wrinkles under his eyes and on his forehead. Neither could it conceal that his brown hair had nearly completely turned grey. The defeat was badgering him as well. Sometimes Björn heard how nightmares tormented Caleb at night. He had lost his whole family, unsure of where his wife and daughter were and whether they still lived. Waiting tires every man, but sheer powerlessness is what breaks his spirit. Still, Caleb always smiled when he spotted Björn, as he did now. He had become the leader of Outer Area 3, another burden to bear. But Caleb would never let it show. Björn had never heard him complain, never felt fear or panic in his voice, doubt or quivering. Caleb was a rock. There was some mandatory chit-chatting between the three of them. The weather, the fake reassurance of their well-being, although they knew that nothing in truth was fine, it was just bearable. There were questions roaming their minds that probably would never find an answer. At least it seemed so now, in this place where time stood still. Annie stopped Caleb before he had the chance to leave. There is someone I wanted to talk to you about. Caleb nodded, folding his hands in front of his torso. Well, there's this woman, you know her, the one with the scar on her back. She refuses to talk about where she got it, probably from some terrible incident in the camp. Now she hasn't left her hut or even her bed for 3 straight days. Her body is absolutely fine as far as I can tell, but she still complains about headache and fatigue. Depression, Björn murmured. Annie raised an eyebrow. It was such a delicate gesture that Björn let a smile slip. He forgot that she had grown up in the outer areas. Depression was only a term for the cities, an occurrence so common that everybody was diagnosed with it. The white pills were the omnipresent cure. But for the outer area folk, who worked hours on end and fought infections and famine, depression was a luxury they couldn't afford. It's common with people who had traumatic experiences, Björn explained, a disease of the mind. There is medication for it in the cities. Let's give therapy a try first, Caleb said, tone unwavering. Where can I find her? Annie pointed to a turf hut further down the path. Caleb nodded and left, a broken man to heal the broken. Sometimes Björn wondered if Caleb had fallen victim to the symptoms of depression himself. Or was it his stoic demeanor that prevented him from forging some crazy plan to retrieve his wife and daughter from the cities? Anybody else would have pondered such a plan. He had rebuilt Outer Area 3 instead, as if leaving his past behind. Björn had a hard time believing that Caleb, of all people, had accepted powerlessness. Or had he just fallen victim to utter resignation? It occurred to Björn that he was alone with Annie. The knot in his throat returned. Björn's mouth began to babble before he could control himself, and he suddenly heard a sharp buzzing coming from his hut right behind him. He was startled for a moment, wondering what the heck it was. A warning? Was something wrong with the drone deviation? But no, it made no such sound. Before he could even fully process what he was hearing, he turned around and sprinted into the hut, frantically searching for the source of the buzzing. No, this couldn't be it. And he followed him, watching his hectic movements with narrowed eyes. What is it? But he gave no answer. He was too preoccupied with the sound that only one device could make. But could this be real? Finally, here it was. Something that looked like the ancient phones from the 90s with a two-way intercom system. This was the buzzing. Björn could not believe his ears. No, this couldn't be it. But maybe it finally was. He pressed a button and slowly, as if doubting his own sense, asked, Rahab? So I hope you enjoyed this episode and hope you enjoyed the first chapter. And if you've listened or watched this far, I hope you're really, you were dragged into the story and enjoyed this chapter. And if you want, you can go ahead and buy my book on every store there is. And I see you in the next episode.